things happening in the news in the world. It's a new year. Things are gonna happen.
New election, a lot of things happening. But you know what? I want to find out what's happening in business. And do you read? Are you a reader? Do you read stuff?
I have people read to me through an Audible app.
Well, yes, but you're familiar with Inc., right?
Yeah, Ink's amazing. Inc 5000, Inc 500,
That's
top
right.
companies.
That's
Yeah.
right. I bet you, if we found somebody from that organization, they can give us a skinny. What do you think?
I agree with you, but there's no way we're going to find somebody from that organization. That's the only problem.
Well, we're magical beings, man. So let's see what we can do in the next 30 seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the Marketing Geeks. Gentlemen, we are the Marketing Geeks. You found somebody for us, didn't you, Mr. Womack?
I did.
Tell us about our guest.
Yeah, today we're joined by Scott Omelianuk, who recently joined Inc. as editor-in-chief. So this is the editor-in-chief of Inc. Magazine, very famous publication, and where his responsibilities include developing new lines of business, serving the entrepreneurial community, and overseeing the events and content that make up the Inc. ecosystem. He mentioned in our pre-interview segment that he joined the company like a month before the pandemic hit, and we'll probably talk about that in just a moment here. Just give you a little bit of brief background, and then I'll let him kind of elaborate a little bit further on his bio. But Scott was trained as a journalist, motivated by business and excited by technology. And his passion is a disruptive do-it-first approach that generates revenue by connecting consumers with content and services. And he's built opportunity for marquee brands across verticals and platforms, including desktop and mobile web, television, print, and digital books and magazines, social media, and other brand extensions. And Mr. Omelianuk is widely known for his 12-year tenure at this old house, where he built his reputation as an inspiring editor and creative strategist who took a beloved brand, polished its image, and built around it a tapestry of related businesses, including digital offshoots, Spanish language TV, lead generation, affiliate revenue, licensed products, and even a mobile game. So I'm going to let you tell the rest, but please welcome to the show, Scott Omelianuk. How are you, Scott?
Hey, Justin, how are you? I'm great. And hi, Andros.
Hey, thank you so much for being on the show. We greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure, and thank you for that embarrassingly rich introduction.
Well, I know I didn't want to go. There's more. There's a couple paragraphs.
But
I wanted to give you an opportunity to just introduce yourself, tell the audience anything that wasn't mentioned right there in the bio, and maybe fill in that gap about the Inc. story where you joined right before the pandemic.
Yeah, sure. Long term, most of my adult life has been spent in a career in media that started out in magazines. I worked for places like GQ and Esquire. I also was always anxious. I think that's how I got to become a journalist, as I was always interested in other things, and that's one way to sort of know more than you're supposed to, right? You don't work in just one silo, you work in a lot. So other media always appealed to me too. And I wanted to be the one who was going to do our TV extension, or I built the first, believe it or not, there was such a time when you had to build a brand's first website. And I did that when I was at Esquire and got involved in television, became a television producer, other digital stuff, returned to sort of big media when Time Warner still existed, working for Time Inc., which owned the This Old House brand, which some of you might be familiar with as the show your parents watched, or even your grandparents. It's been around for 40 years on public television, more than 40 years now. And I inherited that along with a magazine and a website. And as you pointed out, we built out lots of other extensions to make the brand valuable. Ultimately sold it to private equity. We were on an upward trajectory with This Old House, even as Time Inc. and Time Warner were on a downward one. So it became an opportunity to harvest some cash for those businesses. We sold that, and I went out on my own as a consultant.
So what got you into the magazine publication space, journalism space to begin with? Did you major in that in college? Were you like, what was the lead in? Were you like a writer first and then you expanded out to these other avenues like the marketing and websites and all that? Or what was like tell me the initial step into the field.
So actually in college, I was a studio art major.
Okay.
And one day I had a art history professor come up to me and say, her name was Carol Small, and I thank her to this day for it. She said, Scott, I think you're a better writer than you are a painter. Maybe you should consider that. And I
kind of ouch.
I kind of ouch, but it was warmly delivered, right? Mm-hmm. And I considered it. I actually ended up working as a carpenter for a year or so after college because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Did go to graduate school in journalism and ended up at GQ because of that. My role at GQ was to write. At first, it was sort of the entry-level job there, was writing all the magazine's fashion copy. What for me was fascinating about that was connecting with designers and actually the business that drove the rest of the magazine's journalism. So, the ads, the fashion ads in the magazine paid for everything else we did. And so I had I think unlike most people who become writers or editors, my introduction to journalism was very much commercial first and not sort of that church state thing we've heard about over time that has come and gone. And I think that business interest, along with a sort of family history of failed entrepreneurs, sort of like just provoked in me this desire to always be looking at what else can we do? Asking the question, what if? And so my career, I was always doing that, whether that was, what if we have a website, that thing that people are having, or what if we did e-commerce when I was at This Old House? What if we had a home shopping network on our website? At the time, the technology didn't allow for that. I saw this past Christmas that Amazon does that now. So sometimes the what if is no, but eventually it might not be, right? And so that's
so for all the kids listening, back in the early 2000s and whatnot, it was hard to do e-commerce. It wasn't like today where you just pay $50 or something a month and you have it set up for you.
I know. It was like knowing Elvish or something when you could set up a website.
There was definitely no turnkey solution, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, and this is something for everyone to think about wherever they are in their journey, right, is that your idea, no matter how good it is, and that's true whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you work inside of a company, has to be sold to somebody, whether that's an audience, a consumer, or your leadership, and they have to believe in it. And even if it's a good idea, sometimes they don't, for lots of reasons, So we sold This Old House, and I went to work as a consultant, having survived the disruption of media successfully. I thought I had a lot to offer other businesses and that I could help them with whatever disruption they were seeing. I was an atrocious consultant. And I say that because, I didn't work for a big firm. I worked for myself, and I was terrible at picking clients. I picked the ones that had products or services that interested me, not necessarily ones that could pay me, right?
Not ones that had a proven track record of sales, but the ones that were interesting.
Exactly, right? Exactly. Someone who had an idea that I was curious about, and not necessarily that had a consumer. That's a problem when you're trying to earn your living that way. I was a professor at the same time. I teach entrepreneurship, still do, in a business school. And but ultimately, after a handful of years of doing that and picking really bad clients, writing a few stories for Fast Company magazine, or fastcompany.com, I should say, which is Inc.'s sister publication. I was contacted by the company's CEO saying, there's this role open at Inc. I know you have this journalism background. I know you're working in entrepreneurship now. That seems like a good marriage. Would you like to talk about that? And, the paycheck is a little bit more regular than what you've been having as a consultant, and certainly more than you have as a college professor, which is really sort of, work for passion, volunteerism more than anything else. And I didn't think I wanted to do that. I thought I spent 20 years in magazines. Or journalism. I didn't, of all kinds. I didn't need to return. But when I learned about the Inc. audience and who they were and how they really created half the American economy. So Inc. speaks mostly to small businesses and entrepreneurship, responsible for half the American economy. Suddenly, wow, like that's a really interesting audience to be able to engage with every day.
Can you elaborate a little bit about the Inc. 5000 program and kind of I don't know if you have the background and kind of where it came from and what it means? Because I manage a podcast. One of my clients, all he does is interview people that are in the Inc. 5000. And so usually he connected with them out of the YEC, the Young Entrepreneurs Council, I believe, and then he would bring them on the podcast. And there's some of the most brilliant people I've ever heard that come out of the that are running companies in the Inc. 5000. But can you tell the audience a little bit about it and kind of maybe a little like a brief history of it?
Yeah. So the Inc. 5000 started out about 25 years ago as the Inc. 500. It was sort of the small business answer, the privately held company answer to the Fortune 500. And so the measure of success in making the Inc. 500 was whether you could show growth and show more growth in your business than anyone else. And that was quite successful. And like a lot of businesses that have success in a small market, they look for ways to amp it up. So we decided to put a 10x on it and went from the 500 to the 5,000. And still to this day, the Inc. 5000 represents the 5,000 fastest growing privately held companies in the United States. And we're talking about companies that ultimately could become very significant publicly traded ones. They're just not there yet, right? And so we see all different kinds of businesses, but the thing they have in common is they've got smart leadership who has figured out how to really sort of like, get on that Bronco and ride it. And they're doing that. So, and they're an exciting group and they're a passionate group. And as you point out, really smart, really clever.
Yeah, very, very. Hey, real quick, I want to pause for 1 second. Andros, can you hit the record so we have the backup on this?
Oh, yeah.
You're not recording on Squadcast. We're recording through the live stream, so everything's coming through. But just making sure so we have the higher quality audio. So let's. Yeah, sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought for one moment there.
Well, I've got a couple of questions for you. So you've been at this for a year, and when you first got this job, we were in a totally different reality, right? And then all of a sudden we wake up and we're in a dystopian Black Mirror episode. So you've obviously seen a lot of changes. What are your kind of big takeaways in the past year as far as one of the things that you mentioned when we first connected was that you felt that the U.S. government has let businesses down during the pandemic. I agree, but what do you see kind of the opportunities for the new administration? What do you see the lapses, and what have you gathered? Like, what's your kind of pulse over the past year that you've kind of started to understand in this crazy world of ours?
So let's set best intentions aside, right? Because I think intentions are one thing, and the government and the stimulus package and PPP that worked on way back last spring when we just saw everything that we knew fall off that cliff. The idea was good. The execution and delivery of it was terrible, and the information around it was terrible. So people who really needed the money didn't get it. If you didn't have a pre-existing relationship with a lender, that could have been a problem for you. And as a business person, that might have been a point of pride. Like, I didn't need to borrow anyone's money. I bootstrapped this thing. Now suddenly you have this, existential problem that's not of your cause, a secular problem not of your cause, and you need help and you can't get it because you didn't borrow money previously, right? We saw big companies that had the ability to weather a year or more of no revenue, or had alternative lending facilities taking stimulus money. We saw churches taking stimulus money. I'm not quite sure I understand why a church needs that when it has tithers. So to me, all of that was problematic, and ultimately did not help the business community as much, I think, as we hoped when we first heard of it. I think
my opinion on the whole PPP thing was that the intention, like you said, was good, but the qualification process, the vetting process was very, very lax and lacking. And I know that they've gone back and gone after a few people that were blatant with their money and bought, I think with that one story of somebody that bought like a Lamborghini or something with the stimulus money. But for the most part, plenty of businesses got it that really didn't need it. And they used it as a low interest loan when they didn't need it at all. It wasn't a rescue loan for them. It was just like a low interest loan. And I think the intention of the PPP is supposed to be a rescue loan for companies that got it, because that's forgivable money. It's that money was fully forgiven. And then there was also the EIDL, the emergency disaster loan, that they gave out a $1,000 completely free grant for people that applied through that. And then if you got a loan through the EIDL, which I actually did, I was able to get it, but I have to pay it back. It's a 20-year, it's like a 20-year payback at like 3.25%, which is it's a pretty good deal, but it's different. Process wasn't quite there to make it as effective as it should have been.
Yeah, I think that's right. And Justin, I think you might have a future as an Inc. journalist, given how much you understand the lending programs that came out of Congress. So just keep that in mind if you ever need a backup career.
All right.
Oh no, go on. What were you?
I was just going to say, I think we've seen some improvement in the months since, and Amy Klobuchar and her Republican partner have introduced some interesting legislation right now. But the fact is that uneven distribution resulted in a lot of carnage. Ultimately, and a lot of businesses that some of us may know and love that did not or will not survive.
Well, there were a few industries hit a lot worse than others. I mean, the travel industry, including cruises, airlines, and Disneyland and all that, and
the film industry, of course. I mean, which is that's got to talk about
movie theaters for sure.
Yeah, I mean that's like that. I mean, aside from the loss of life, which has been tragic, and the illness that people have suffered, and but as far as businesses go, I'm lamenting the death of the movie theater, because there's no way that's ever going to come back. Going to a movie, seeing something opening night with a big crowd of people in a small room together, that's never going to happen again. And
I think I've said this. The only way it comes back is like IMAX only, and it's going to be just like one big screen, and it's going to be purely experiential, but it's not going to be like 20 multiplexes anymore. I don't think we're going to see that ever again.
So what moving forward, I mean, we can rehash the old administration, which I really care not to do, but moving forward, what do you, we don't have a blank slate. We're getting deeper in debt, but what do you think should happen moving forward with some of these businesses, and how they're treated, and how we help the economy? What do you see as some of the solutions here?
I think one fundamental solution, and again, I care not to dwell on the past administration either, don't necessarily want to politicize this in any way, but one fundamental to business that all business heads appreciate is some sense of stability. Now, that stability can be on a downward trajectory still, right? We could still have infections, we can still have deaths, we can still have business going bankrupt, but knowing everyone is sort of marching in the same direction allows us to plan. So I think a comprehensive government plan that we've heard of around, we heard Janet Yellen talk about this, the new Secretary of Treasury, say the single most important thing we can do for the economy is to get the pandemic under control, right? And that's true. And so to have a plan that suggests we're going to get that done, I think helps businesses enormously. I think the idea of some stability, some professionalism in the ranks of government will be very useful to people, because it does allow them to think in a linear way and start to plan how they get out of the hole they're in. To me, that's important. That does not mean that businesses will all survive. We'll still see some fail. To me, the pandemic with respect to business has been a lot like it's impacted individuals, right? Certain groups, certain communities have been affected by it much more than others. So you guys talk about movie theaters, travel, and things like that, but also smaller businesses, small family businesses, first generation businesses, businesses that are highly face-to-face service, all of those restaurants, all of those things, I think will remain touch and go. We have seen at Inc. Many of those businesses fail. We've seen others, clinging to the edge of the cliff with their fingernails, digging in and perhaps they'll survive. Other businesses we've seen succeed enormously in this time. And so it's really interesting. And except for the only thing I think the only thing the ones that have failed ultimately have in common is that they were some of the youngest, some of the least resourced, and of course had the bad luck to be in hospitality or face-to-face service or what have you.
Anywhere with a retail space, anywhere with a lease or office rent and all that. I think, there's a lot that to kind of unpack there with everything that's gone on. But what about like how was the impact of kind of like, I know in California we recently had like the backlash between a restaurant owner and a Hollywood set where the restaurant owner has been told they couldn't open their restaurant and they couldn't have outdoor vendors or outdoor diners outside. And then the governor in California gave Hollywood an exemption to the lockdown orders and called them a essential business. And they ended up filming like right outside her restaurant and setting up a food area right outside of her restaurant, which created this whole viral kind of moment on social media. But I that's where I see some of the problems that have come with the way that they've managed the lockdowns is when you there's favoritism for certain industries, or a lot of the politicians kind of will, when the doors are closed, do something different than what they even say. So I think that's kind of created some of this backlash that we're seeing. And then now with like Gavin Newsom's very close to a recall threshold, and all of a sudden California reopens, which is kind of interesting. But that's just kind of some of the things that I've seen. But it seems like some of the frustrations of the small business owners is just that there's not been, like, even when they reopened California just now, there was no prior notice. It just happened out of the blue. Like it took everybody by surprise. Nobody knows what to do. So even though I think California has a general kind of moving in the same direction kind of plan, they're not necessarily communicating with the people very clearly. And I think some of the communication has been a problem to land with businesses, and maybe that will change now that the whole government's under one party for the most part.
Well, one thing we've seen, right, at least at the White House in the last week or however long it's been, is there has been a daily press conference, which there hadn't been before. And that conveying of information is really important. I think you make a great point. And I actually don't think that's a government down thing. It's also employer to employee thing, and in business to community member thing. Is at times like this, especially when we're isolated and in a lockdown, sitting at home, only communicating through appointments made on Zoom, there's a lot of time to ruminate and a lot of time to grow paranoid, right? And a lot of time to assume the worst of others. And that's not necessarily, and sometimes that might be appropriate, I suppose, but it's not always appropriate. And so I think the need for communication, that is a huge lesson that I personally have learned with my own business in the last year, but I can see with governments and with businesses is that given the tools we have to communicate right now and the expectations people have of instantaneous communication, we need to be much more clear. And I think when we do that, what someone does in public versus what they do in private, or maybe even, I've forgotten my mask when I always, where my wife is in healthcare, evidence-based medicine. She's always, so clearly we wear masks here in this house. I've run out down the street to move the car because I live in the city, right? We move the car from one side to the other for the street sweeper. I've forgotten my mask a couple of times. Like, someone could have snapped a picture of that and like, look at this schmuck without his mask, right? But a lot of that goes away. You get the benefit of the doubt when you're communicating enough and people know that you have their best interests at heart. And I think that need for communication, it is a form of marketing, actually, right? Yeah. Is really useful and something everyone should be paying attention to.
Well, I think there's in marketing or for fulfillment, I've heard the saying that if you communicate every step of the way through your process and then deliver a result that's maybe half as good as somebody else, but the other person delivers that result with zero communication, the one that's been communicating all the way through is going to get a better, they're going to be thought of as a better review, more professional, happier client, even though the other person has actually the better statistical result maybe, but there wasn't the communication. So it's at the very least, it's a satisfaction indicator of how somebody feels about the local government or the state government or the federal government.
Yeah, communication is key.
And by the way, I think this is why DTC businesses on the web kill traditional retail, right? It's because they're built on this premise of that kind of communication and customer service, whether it's sort of the founder story or it's the non-transactional communications that go out all the time, not just hey, we have a sale now, buy from us kind of thing. And then the updating of, product picked off the shelf, product package, product picked up, delivered to you on Tuesday. I think that makes a huge difference. And it has become now a level of expectation, right? So those are sort of table stakes, not a nice to have necessarily.
Now, but there's one thing within all of that I just want to point out, and that is, yes, we collectively have kind of made this transition from being out in the world to now like being insular and just ordering stuff in. But I feel that on some level, there's the class gap has become even wider because now our society is really dependent on these people who are delivering the goods and going to the store and making sure the shelves are stocked. And these people are in a lot of ways, they're at most risk for COVID and for bankruptcy and for all of this stuff. So it goes into this broader thing because I feel that, especially in America, capitalism is at this crossroads, right? Because we have to really start paying attention to what things cost. Like when you buy chocolate, is that chocolate cheap, but is it also slave labor chocolate? Is the stuff in your phone, is that being used by resources that are unsustainable? So with that, things don't on some level cost what I think they should cost. So how do we bridge that when we have like these, we either become an exploitive capitalistic society or we tend to be gentler and with more of an approach of community?
I think that's a great point, right? And I don't know a lot of people who can feel good, for example, about Instacart right now and what they just did, firing all of their unionized employees. And you're right. I see people, I don't leave my house and I see people every day who have and are bringing me things. I certainly take a moment, there is a moment of personal reflection for me every time I do get a delivery about that, frankly, because it's something I think about. One of the things I'm seeing, and obviously the impulse is to say this is generational, but I don't think it entirely is, because there are bastards in every generation, right? I mean, we can look at, whether, Kim Jong-un is a millennial, right? So we can't apply this.
Typical millennial.
We can't apply this broadly, but there is something afoot in the new business leader that is taking into account what you're saying, and we're seeing it constantly at Inc. A lot of women-owned businesses are just fundamentally this way. A lot of minority-owned businesses are fundamentally this way. We actually launched a new program this year to compete with the Inc. 5000, which, I'm not going to say, I am saying it out loud, but, in some ways might be part of a cause of the problem you're talking about, right? The Inc. 5000 is about fast growth companies. It's a get there at any cost. And there's some measure of pride in that, no question about that. But as a complement to that, we've launched a program called Best in Business that recognizes the companies that understand that people are as important as profits, that the impact you make with your consumer, with your client, in your community, that has nothing to do with the P&L can be as significant as the P&L.
I think one of the challenges with that has been that when companies go public, I don't know, for the Inc. 5000, I'm not sure if there's, I don't think there's a requirement to be a public company.
No, they're not public companies.
They're not public. Exactly. They're all private companies. Yeah. Okay. When they go public, they have their what's the word, fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders, and to basically make the most money possible, make them the most money possible. And that's kind of the excuse that companies will hide behind when they don't give donations or don't support certain causes. And technically they could say it's actually illegal for us to do so because of that. Now we've seen a little bit of a shift in California and probably some other states, I don't know for sure, but like B corporations are a new thing that have kind of a new corporate structure that kind of allows for that kind of social responsibility and environmental responsibility aspect to be weaved into things. So it's actually it defines like your responsibilities to the stakeholders, which are your shareholders, but also to your customers and also to the general population at large. And I think that's kind of a better approach. I mean, especially for these companies that are just like sitting on billions of dollars of cash. I mean, there's no downside to them donating a bunch of it because they could still probably get their tax write-offs and everything. The only reason they don't is because because of the way that the law works.
But you know, there's no question that we're seeing a change in that. And we're seeing a change, you know, with the Business Roundtable, which represents a couple hundred top CEOs, have talked about the idea that the shareholder is only one of their interests, not necessarily even the primary one. Larry Fink has written his letter to shareholders about this issue. And we're seeing a lot more independent research that actually suggests paying attention to corporate social responsibility, or ESG, actually has better financial returns than not paying attention to it. And I think ultimately we'll see two different kinds of companies. We'll see the big companies, the publicly traded companies, starting to realize this, right? Apple donating $100 million to support historically Black universities and technology. So we'll see big companies doing that. Is that enough money? Probably not. Can Apple afford more? Sure. Why not? But then we'll see other companies that are younger starting out that have, if not a B Corp, if not woven into their charter, as we've seen many have, understand in concert with their employees that this is important. And it's up to us then as individuals, whether we're a part of a team or whether we're a consumer, to make sure those companies are accountable. At the beginning of the pandemic, when businesses started closing, people would ask me what we should do. And my answer often was, ask yourself what kind of world you want to live in when the pandemic is over. And is it just going to be one in which you get doorstep delivery and that's it, and all of the sort of nice things about living in a community are gone and outsourced? And you know, is that what you want or not? And I think the same questions still apply. Do we want to live in a world where shareholder gain is the only important thing, or do we want to live in a world where we understand that the money we're spending can make a difference? And I think increasingly people are realizing that. In 3 weeks, we got 3,000 applications to our first Best in Business awards with virtually no promotion. And there are companies in there that were doing just absolutely amazing things, and in industries you wouldn't necessarily think were doing it. So, for example, the distillery industry, a good old boy network in Kentucky, right? But there's a new business called Uncle Nearest. Uncle Nearest was the slave who taught Jack Daniel how to distill whiskey. A woman met his family, his descendants, and together they started a new whiskey business called Uncle Nearest. They have a completely diverse board and an entire female leadership team. And they've won award after award after award for their whiskey as well. So Uncle Nearest is going to do wonderfully well, and people can feel good about buying it because they're making a difference in that world. And there's so many businesses like this. I had an Inc. 5000 member contact me and say, I know it's coming up at the holiday times. I bought so many tests, rapid tests for my staff so they could feel comfortable. Do you want some yourself so you can go visit your family during the holiday? People are just thinking differently. They're taking the time to have these conversations, I think are different. And I think we just have I hope it lasts, you know, that we have a better understanding that we're all interconnected in ways we never saw before, invisibly, and that those interconnections can have profound effects for ill in the case of a pandemic, or for good.
it may not last at the level it's at now, but it'll last at some level. It'll be increased from when we started. The consciousness around that will be increased. I live in Camarillo, California. So right in my backyard, we have Patagonia, which is Ventura, about 20 minutes away from me. And to me, that's like the company that kind of epitomizes giving back and creating a corporate social responsibility model, because they've been doing it from before this was even a big issue. They've been doing it for a long time now. But I look at that company and as like kind of the model that I think more businesses should follow. The other thing I wanted to bring up is you mentioned that women and minority business owners were taking on different models of building their companies. I do some volunteer work for an organization that's in Ventura County and Santa Barbara County called Women's Economic Venture. And it's all mostly women entrepreneurs that go through training, and then they collaborate and get consulting afterwards. And I volunteer and consult with many of them. But one of the companies that they highlighted pre-pandemic, I'm going to give you this, pre-pandemic, was a company where the woman that had started it was running, I think it was just a hair barbershop but every employee had ownership in the company. And it was like, almost, I think it was fully equal shares of ownership in the way. So I don't know exactly what the name of that structure was, but she was saying the company was in Santa Barbara and every employee was a homeowner. That was one of the things she said. She's like, at my company, every single employee owns their own home. And like, it was pretty profound. She got a standing ovation. And so I don't know how she's been impacted by, everything with COVID and all, but I mean, it's pretty interesting to see these different models that are kind of coming up, and like actually shared equity with your employees is something that maybe more small businesses should look at. Maybe you don't think we're ever going to see that not for a long time in corporate America, but at least in the small business level,
it is changing. I mean, one of the things, there's two parts to this. One of this is that a lot of companies are, and a lot of entertainment is trying to make this shift by saying, well, we have to be inclusive now. We have to be, and they're really making an effort. The argument against it, I hear, is that, oh, well, I don't want to hire the person just because of their color of their skin. I want to hire them because they're the best. And on some level, I totally agree with that. However, if we don't force the issue, it will never happen, because I don't care what people say. There is institutional racism that has been developed through the capitalist system. It is there, and we are now addressing it. There are racist police officers. That is now a thing. We know this now, and I think that on some level, part of what the disharmony that we're seeing in the United States specifically has a lot to do with this kind of existential crisis that America is starting to go through.
I want to say one thing to that real quick, because I was also like back in the mid 90s, late 90s, I was very against the idea of affirmative action because of exactly what you said. It's like, oh, why are the people that are qualified not going to get the job? We're just going to give it to a minority candidate because they are a minority. I've come around on that view quite a bit because we've had that, we've kind of explored that policy for, 30 years or 20 years since then. And the reality has been that people will not they won't provide the opportunity to break into these industries without kind of having their hand forced. Yeah. So, I mean, there's something going on where in 20 years that the limited progress for corporate boards and, even for like the Academy Awards in Hollywood and things like that, where the diversity just hasn't come on its own naturally. So I've kind of come around to accepting it a lot more than I used to, because I used to have a different view about it. But the reality is that this kind of thing kind of is needed. So
what do you think about that?
If I may say, as someone who does a lot of hiring, the idea of the best candidate is one that we create in our minds. There is no best candidate. Everyone, maybe if you're LeBron James or Steph Curry, you're the best candidate, right? But beyond that, we all bring a different set of skills, and maybe they don't immediately align with what you thought they were going to be, but that doesn't mean they can't be very valuable skills. And ultimately, in a world, as you point out, Andros, that has seen a lot of institutional racism, unlocking those skills can lead to so much more growth for everybody. And I think that's something for us to understand that the opportunity for home ownership, passed down money, intergenerational wealth that can be created by this actually benefits everybody. And while someone might fear they're losing out on something, and individually we might see one or two people who have lost out on something that they thought they deserved more than anyone else, as a society, we will our boats will rise with that tide. And so there's no question to me that approaching diversity, and Inc. is working very hard at this in the people it hires. It already, I think, does a pretty good job and has to continue to be mindful of how it covers entrepreneurs individually this way. But we will benefit from not having parts of our nation as also rans, as left behinds, as other considerations, but participating in the economy. I ultimately believe, that enlightened capitalism is the way forward. It just can't be capitalism driven by greed and prejudice.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I find very interesting about the pandemic, which is what it's really showed us is that we are a nation that can definitely afford to provide healthcare for every single citizen. We have enough money in the United States to do that, and this is the reason why we may want to do that, right? Because the primary factor for it being so out of control in the United States is that there are people who have to consider whether or not they're going to go to a hospital or pay rent for like several months. And that's just not, I mean, I live here in the Netherlands, as a lot of our listeners know, and I pay a ridiculous amount of tax. I pay like 50%. But you know what? My health insurance for me and my son, who's 6, is €150 a month, and it's great. It's fantastic healthcare.
But by the way, having that kind of safety net has a profound impact on entrepreneurship and business success in general, right? Right now, despite all we might talk about, entrepreneurship in the United States is in decline. Now, if entrepreneurship is in decline and entrepreneurship makes up 50% of your economy and the other 50% actually grew out of entrepreneurship, that's not a good story. And then you look at places like the Netherlands, you look at Sweden, you look at Israel that have a social safety net that might provide for school, so you're not saddled with hundreds of dollars in student loans, that have health insurance. It allows you to take the risks to be an entrepreneur that the United States right now is not allowing. Yeah. And it's why we see places like where you live outpunch their weight in terms of innovation. Because
that's something that also is kind of passed down generationally as well, because if you come from a family of means, you're not going to be as fearful of taking risks because you have like that safety net of your parents or things like that to fall back on. That not everybody's going to have that kind of a safety net behind them. I know I had that for me. Fortunately, I didn't have to use it, but necessarily. But I had it. If I had bankrupted myself, I would have. Wouldn't have been the end for me. I would have found a way out of it. And like you say, not everybody has that backup. The other thing that I would like to see is an expansion of kind of financial education to youth through public education, because I think one of the ways that the wealth stays with the same people over and over again is that the people that know how to make money and know how to make money work for them are teaching, they're mentoring their kids from a very, very young age. So not only do they have the accounts and the pre-existing money, but they're also getting the mentorship privately that the other youth are not getting. So I would really like to see somehow like some sort of expansion, because it's ridiculous that in 2021 there's at your public school, like the most, maybe you learn how to write a check, but that's like the most financial education you're going to get at public high school.
Yeah, as part of Inc., I have quite often cause to talk to Damon John, and one of his passions is people understanding financial literacy or having financial literacy, and how he describes how he came to it himself, and how important it is more broadly. And there's no question, it's the way, it might not be the way to go from living paycheck to paycheck to living a much more comfortable life, but it's part of it, right? You have to have it to get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely part of it. I mean, just the terminology and just kind of understanding. I mean, if you don't have that kind of knowledge, you're not going to even know what escrow payments are for real estate deals. You're not going to know how the stock market works. And I mean,
how to save for retirement or anything
taken for granted that are just totally not taught in public schools.
Or just compounding interest, which Warren Buffett thinks is the most powerful force in the universe.
Exactly.
Right?
So I want to skip ahead a little bit because you into the future, because you said you were talking to some of these businesses that are doing really innovative things. And before we started the show, you said you have a lot of hope for businesses in the future. And what do you see that gives you the most hope right now?
I think there are a couple of things. One, I can't get past the idea that new business founders have a sense of social responsibility that others just had not before, and that gives me profound hope. And that extends from where they're sourcing products and whether that's fair trade and what impact it has on the environment and the community they might be sourcing them in Central America, what impact they're having in the community where they live, what impact they're having on their workers and whether they're considering them as human resources or human beings, and ultimately the impact they're having on the consumer. And in doing that Best in Business project, it was so heartening to see companies of all kinds, certainly younger companies overrepresented, but companies of all kinds waking up and paying attention to this, funding financial literacy programs, for example, funding STEM programs, making sure local entrepreneurial organizations had the right membership composition. As you pointed out, Justin, you volunteering with a women's entrepreneurship organization. All of these companies are doing that, and it's really exciting. The second thing is, and I see this in students I teach as a professor as well, and it's this willingness to tackle the gnarliest problems we have, and the creativity and the tools available to them to solve them, right? So remarkable companies doing remarkable things, taking roads and turning them into energy generators instead of just something that you grind your tires on and leave a trail of oil behind. Creating cinder blocks to sustain, building, but those cinder blocks soak up carbon dioxide instead of contributing to the problem. So many amazing vertical farming, urban farming. I'm just a couple of miles from one of the world's largest indoor farms, right? That is basically net zero in its energy and water consumption, uses no pesticides.
That is so exciting to me. That technology that's like that can save humanity.
And then the carbon footprint it removes, getting food from where you are, Justin, to where I am, or tulips, Andros, from where you are to where I am, right? And like all of that is amazing. And so to see all of that, the only thing that to my mind that stands in its way is our own greed. And if we can get past our own greed, if we can get past this moment of political populism, I think there are just remarkable things to be uncorked. And it's really an exciting time, despite the challenges.
I fully agree, and that's part of the existential crisis that I'm kind of witnessing. And I think that the problem, when asked what is the problem, a lot of people say, well, it's education. We got to educate people to know how our government works. But I actually feel that it's a narcissism. I think narcissism is the plague that is destroying, eroding culture, because especially when people are this is mine, and I feel like especially the argument with healthcare, for instance, is I don't want the janitor at my kid's school to get the same healthcare as me, because that obviously means that I'm not getting good healthcare, which is ridiculous. Instead of saying, why don't you make sure that the janitor at your kid's school, since the person interacts with kids, gets the absolute best healthcare, and the teachers get paid absolutely the best. And so it's like we're in this kind of strange twilight zone where we know the problems, yet the system is racing so fast that we can't turn the ship quite fast enough.
I've talked about on the show before how I feel like millennials started this, but it's gone more to Generation Z. Is the culture in the United States is shifting from your individualistic culture to a collectivist culture, which has been more common in countries like Japan throughout history, or even in the countries, Scandinavian countries in Europe. So I think that Generation Z is very much has a collectivist mindset that hasn't really existed in the United States, because when I grew up, we were watching MTV Cribs and everyone was accumulating, and it was all about making money. So I understand that the individualistic mindset, and I also understand where sometimes it gets out of hand. and it gets to be, it's like, when is enough enough? You'll often hear that kind of a saying around this. So I do think that we are kind of having a culture war in a sense, where we have those two different ideologies kind of confronting one another, and so, and some people don't want to evolve into a more collectivist, like everybody support everyone else kind of model.
So oh no, go ahead, Scott. I'm curious what you think of this.
I was just going to say that I think that's what historically we call democratic socialism, and the greatest advances we've made as a species have come under, and I'm not meaning Democrat Republican, I'm talking about a political philosophy and that started with the Enlightenment 400 years ago, right? So that idea of democratic socialism has moved us from serfdom to where we are now, essentially. And my hope is, and this may be terribly naive, and it certainly doesn't mean you don't need to fight against it, but my hope is that those voices we hear that are loudest, the people who are the most selfish, are really sort of a smaller fraction of who we deal with every day. They just have a megaphone that is bigger than they deserve, and what they're saying is upsetting enough to us that we really hear it. And so ultimately, that's my hope. I have to believe that. I have a 9-year-old, Andros, you have a 6-year-old, right? Like we have to.
I have a 2-year-old.
You have a 2-year-old, so Justin, right? So we all have to believe that. It is up to us, however, not just to believe it, but to do things about it. So make those decisions. Make decisions as business leaders, how we're going to organize our company, who we're going to hire, how we're going to consider our supply chain. As parents, what we're going to teach our children as being acceptable or not acceptable. As marketers, what messages are appropriate and which aren't, right? And that can go many different ways. But I think once my hope is that if enough of us do that, we'll see the positive change we really need.
Yeah, and so what is your prediction, kind of looking at like how the recovery is going to go? Can you project, like, based on what the patterns you've seen? I mean, history doesn't repeat, but it definitely rhymes. So what's your pulse on all of that?
Yeah, I think I've been talking to a lot of Inc.'s editors, the business community around Inc. We have a data scientist who I've talked about with this, and I think a lot of the things that people have sort of decided aren't possible anymore or will never return. I agree with both of you, by the way, on movie theaters. I don't think they're happening again, but I think there is going to be an enormous pent-up demand for human-to-human contact. I think we are going to see something of a more enlightened version of the Roaring '20s, when social experimentation and wealth actually kind of exploded. I think we're in for a really interesting time, and hopefully with the lessons we've learned from the past, so that the Roaring '20s doesn't turn into the Great Depression, that the social experimentation does not lead to ugliness of any kind, and that feeds into my positivity. The pent-up consumer demand for experiences more than products, right? Because we can still get a lot of products. It's the experiences. And so doubling down on the idea of experience being important, interacting with more people, realizing how lonely we were and how good it feels to be with someone. I'm quite hopeful that we're going to get to a very interesting, prosperous, really nice place to be.
Yeah, I fully agree with you on that. I mean, I've been going to the Burning Man Festival for the past 2 decades. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to go there at all, but it they have this gifting economy, and you can't buy anything. It's just more, people set up like bike shops, they set up restaurants and cafes, and they just give it just to give people that experience. And I do feel, since we have this younger generation who have seen, they grew up in an era where they've watched their parents lose their homes, lose their businesses, and now they've tried to start something and everything's been stalled. It's going to be very interesting to see what blossoms out of this, because I do agree with you that we have all now looked in the mirror and not really liked what we've seen. So now this is the last moment. We have a choice to make, this is it. After this, whatever happens in the next few years is going to determine what happens to the species for the next 5,000. So if you were to advise the Biden administration on how to help businesses and how to really incentivize the future you're talking about, what would you recommend?
I think I go back to what I said before. And by the way, just let me say this really quickly.
Yeah.
Like this optimism that I have, right? It's very easy to have that as a white male who's had, a successful career and an enormous amount of privilege. I think there's a tremendous amount of work still to be done.
Yeah.
And there are people who are still, profoundly marginalized in our society, and that we will take generations to fix. But I am hopeful that it's fixable. And I just felt like I needed to say that.
No, I totally agree with that.
I think as far as the Biden administration is concerned, I would talk about what they've already, I think, brought to the table, which is a sense of little bit more of a sense of normalcy, a little bit more of a plan. That security or just sort of base level stability being incredibly important to business. Understanding that in the United States anyway, half of the founders we talk about are first generation Americans, right? Understanding that while we may not have the capacity for immigration that we have historically had, immigrants are still incredibly important to the sense of possibility and innovation that exists here. And then allowing, instituting the right rules and regulations to allow that, right? I am someone who, as a business person, I do not think regulation is a bad thing. I think regulation often spurs remarkable creativity, right? If you took gasoline away from us tomorrow, we would very quickly figure out a way to power automobiles, just like Elon Musk has 10 different times over, right? So I think, having sensible regulations and doing the work of making sure that we have some sort of safety net for people that we don't feel we have now will allow prosperity to continue, to sort of return and then continue from a really great place.
So, yeah, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, I wanted to bring something up, and it's kind of a question. I don't want to make it political, but I'd like to hear argument, counter argument, kind of. One of the proposed policies of the Biden administration right now is to raise minimum wage federally to, I believe, $15, possibly higher. And personally, I don't see the value in it because as a business owner, I mean, in California, it doesn't really make that much of a difference because I think the minimum wage here is $14 already. It's set to be $15 next year. But in other states, like in the Midwest, $15 is very different than $15 in California. And I think the economies are somewhat different. I'd be curious to hear kind of the argument for how, because in my opinion, if you tell those businesses to pay $15 an hour, what will happen is they'll have to cut back, employees. It'll end up in jobs that the ones that remain will make more money. And I also worry that, the more money that goes into the economy potentially could trigger some sort of inflation, things like that, which could happen. But more so on the side of lost jobs because small businesses can't necessarily afford to pay $15 an hour. But Amazon, they won't care. I mean, they'll barely blink at it because it won't affect them. So it seems like to be, another kind of policy that would benefit big business and hurt small business. But I'd be interested in hearing the counter argument to it because I haven't really had a dialogue on it in a while, and so it hasn't really come up in a while since. But now that Biden's proposing it again, I'm just wanted to bring it up and see what your thoughts are and how it could work if it were implemented.
Well, first, to take a step back and say that I think I as someone. I might be an anomaly, but as someone who runs a business magazine, I have no problem with an increase in corporate tax rate for people like Amazon, right? Yeah, and we can do a lot of good with that money. I think when it comes to smaller businesses, there is a concern, and certainly I hear this among much of the Inc. universe, that there is the concern about how they pay those people. In many places, as you point out, it's already a non-issue because minimum wage nearly gets there. I think another piece of it to consider, sort of, we talked before about rising tide lifting all boats. When at the level we're talking about, I don't see inflation being an issue. No one's running out and buying. We're talking about being able to go from being below the poverty level to at the poverty level. So you're buying necessities with that money, not not stuff, not new phones. Well, maybe a phone is a necessity now, right? But not a bunch of stuff you don't need. We've seen with every dollar increase in minimum wage, we actually have seen mortality rates drop in inner cities, for example. So I think if you take all of those things together and ask yourself, do you want people in your community who can actually afford your product? Right, there's something Henry Ford understood that he needed to make the cost of the Model T available to buyable for his workers, and if they couldn't buy it, no one could, right? So, do you want your product to be affordable in your community? Do you want your community not to have the poverty it has now? But we all have to figure out a way to get there. And sure, the easy way might be to lay off people, but we also have access to tools now that we have never had before that allow us to automate things, that allow us to make other parts of our business easier, and that create not only the potential for new sales, but the potential for lots of savings. There are ways we can get there, I think, that are not necessarily the immediate thing we see. The knee-jerk thing we see is I can't afford any more payroll, but ultimately, I think there's some good to be had once we get there.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, we've come to the end of the show. Unfortunately, this has been so amazing. Scott Omelianuk.
Come on, Andros. Come on.
Oh man. Okay, hold on. Here we go. Omelianuk.
Omelianuk.
Man, if I have a superpower for anything, it's messing up my guest names. That's
Justin came
fair, you do have a tough one though, Scott.
I do, and it's why most people call me Scott O, and that's fine.
I wrote it down, and I have a Word document open that I wrote it out phonetically. So
I don't hold it against Justin for screwing it up. It's okay.
Well,
you're not the first one.
Before we go, we ask all of our guests, we want to find out, what are you most geeky about right now? Because I see there's, for those of you watching the live stream, there's a bookshelf behind you. But what are you into right now that's not really work related?
That's actually a doorway to a library, which I'm very much into. So two things real quick. I have... And I've done this like you're going out and you're buying goods on the black market, basically. I have set up a home gym because I'm a pretty passionate exercise person and have not been able to. So I'm very excited about this big Smith machine I've installed in the basement. I think that qualifies a little bit. And I am reading right now as an escape from our day to day, right? I'm reading a series of books about a Victorian era London-based detective, just because it is so transporting. It's a series called Charles Lennox by a guy named Charles Finch, and to me, it's the thing that takes me away from all of the stuff I've worried about.
So historical fiction, though.
It's historical fiction.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice. Well, Justin, real quick, what's your geek out thing right now?
I already told you I watched Wonder Woman 1984, but I guess the geek out thing is WandaVision, man, on Disney Plus.
Oh, no spoilers. No spoilers.
I started watching WandaVision. It's interesting. I actually like it. I do. I mean, I like it. It's very very different than your typical Marvel Cinematic Universe movie or TV entry. But I like where it's going. I think it's gonna be a fascinating show as it gets toward the final episodes. So I'm excited for it. I like it. It's it drips out weekly. So you might want to wait like 4 more weeks, Andros, or 6 more weeks till it's all available.
I'm forcing my wife to watch all the Marvel movies just so I could watch it with her. So
catch up.
Much to her chagrin. I'm reading.
How many are there now? Like 24, 25?
Something like that. I'm reading Onyx and Crake by Margaret Atwood, which is a great dystopian trilogy. I'm on the first book. Recommend it very highly. She's a master, man. Margaret Atwood, Handmaid's Tale, the sequel she just came out with. She's a master. Anyway, very entertaining. Where
I still want to bring one more geeky thing. Is I'm still bullish on this new social media app Clubhouse. Are you on there yet, Scott?
I am,
okay,
and I feel the dam is about to burst on Clubhouse in terms of it's reaching this crescendo of attention that I find it fascinating. That is something I wonder: will Clubhouse survive the pandemic? I was on it on Saturday night from 6 to 8 o'clock. Am I going to do that when I can go out to dinner on a Saturday night instead?
Yeah, exactly. It'll be very different because people are stuck in their homes and things like that. So right now is the golden era on there, but it's like, this is like back in the early 2000s. You could just like open up a Clubhouse room and attract like 100 people. It's pretty crazy, like how much free traffic you can get right now, which is very rare in the marketing space. But I've been in rooms with Damon John. I've been in a room. We were just in a room yesterday. I was co-moderating a room yesterday with John Lee Dumas, the famous podcaster, and it's really cool to see the level of access you get to people that are pretty famous at least in the business world on there. So I'm a fan of it. I'll probably be on there for a while, but I think you're right that it's not going to maintain the momentum it has right now long term.
But I would say right now we're using it for Inc. to market the Inc. 5000 and some other things we're doing. So I do think you're right. I think it's a really interesting opportunity to get on there and tell your business's message.
Nice.
And Inc. How do people subscribe to Inc. magazine if they want to read the magazine?
So you hit our website, and there's a combination package that we have where you get access to the site, access to the magazine, and a couple of other things all together. Totally worth it as far as I'm concerned.
Scott, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm going to stop the live stream right now, but and people could find you on LinkedIn as well. Yeah,
of course. LinkedIn, Twitter. Yep.
I've got his links in the bio.
Nice. Well.